Good evening and welcome once again to another program of Issues in the News, where we discuss the important events that would have taken place in our country over the past week or so. I want to begin by extending good night greetings to all of our viewers who are joining us on television in West Coast Berbice, Mahaika, all the way to Ithaca. I want also to welcome our viewers who are joining us on television on the east bank of the Berbice River, from New Amsterdam all the way across the bank of the river, then Kanji, Quarantine Coast, all the way to Molson Creek, and sometimes I forget that the people all the way at Oriala look at us on the television. Good evening and welcome once again to another program of Issues in the News. To our viewers who are joining us on Freedom Radio, good evening and welcome once again. And most importantly, to the thousands of you who are joining us across Guyana, the Caribbean, North America, Europe, Asia, on Facebook Live. Good evening and welcome to another program of Issues in the News. I want to begin by apologizing for our non-appearance last week. At the umpteenth minute, we encountered some technical difficulties which forced me to abort the program. So we apologize for that, but we are back on now and we have a packed agenda. So I have often spoken about the persons who robbed, burned the roads, beat and robbed people, damaged the stalls, and create mayhem in the vicinity of Monrepo Market some 6 months ago. And I promised, when the incident occurred, the government promised, the president promised, the prime minister promised that charges will be instituted, charges of a very serious type, charges which reflect the gravity of the wrongs committed, would be filed. And it took a little time for the police to conduct and conclude their investigations. And earlier this week, 9 men were charged and were granted bail in the sum of $300,000. These persons are captured based upon what I have read in the newspapers, are captured, their images are captured on videotape. Persons gave statements identifying them, and the videotapes illustrate what activities they were engaged in. Most of you may have seen the images on the social media platform and on the various conventional media platforms. You would have seen the blocking and burning of roads, the public road in particular. You would have seen the destruction and damage to persons' vehicles and other forms of private property. You would have seen the robbery and violence meted out to users of the roads. You would have seen the violence and robbery which took place in respect of vendors of the Monrepo Market. You would have seen the robbery and violence meted out to passerbys and users, customers of the market. You would have seen the wanton destruction and damage done to the stalls of the market. You would have seen the flagrant looting of merchandise being sold by the vendors. And this was done with impunity. Persons were simply pulling things off people's stalls and walking off with them and throwing them in vehicles and driving off with them. Wholesale highway robbery. That cannot be conduct which any lawful society will condone and countenance. That is conduct that must be condemned in the strongest possible fashion. And any society governed by the rule of law must visit those types of behavior with the strongest of criminal charges and consequent sanctions. Terrorism was identified by those who offered legal advice on this matter, the DPP and the police legal advisor, as the appropriate charge. And the charges were laid before a magistrate, and the persons' wanted bulletins were issued for them. 9 of them so far surrendered, and I believe a few others are still at large, and they were placed before a magistrate at Sparenda Magistrates Court and released on bail. Many persons, many members of the public have expressed their disquiet with the decision of the magistrate to grant bail in the sum of $300,000 each, having regard to the nature of the conduct of these individuals. But the judiciary is independent, and we all have to accept what the decisions that come from the judiciary. We can criticize them if you wish. They are open to criticism, but in a legal system and in a civilized democratic society, the judiciary is free to make its decisions. Hopefully, these charges are going to be competently prosecuted, and hopefully the appropriate decision will be made based upon the evidence presented to the court. We have other incidents which have since occurred at Buxton a few weeks ago, where a vehicle suspected to be conveying marijuana was being intercepted, followed by the police and then intercepted. And that led to some type of outpouring of disorder in the roadways of Buxton. Persons there will be charged as well. Similar occurrence took place at Hopetown on the west coast of Berbice. The police, as far as I am aware, are investigating, and hopefully charges will emanate therefrom as well. Because there again, persons took the law into their own hands and began to assault a driver of a motor vehicle who may have driven recklessly and may have caused an accident or did cause an accident. But persons cannot be allowed to become vigilantes and take the law into their own hands and begin to administer punishment. Because if that is replicated across this land, we will simply descend into a state of anarchy. And that will be the end of civilized society, and that will be the end of law and order as we know it. And we simply cannot, as a society, countenance and condone this type of lawlessness. And this has nothing to do with politics. And politicians must be condemned when they attempt to convert these matters into political issues. These are matters of law and order. They are not matters of politics. Not because a person is aggrieved by the behavioral conduct of any agency of state, including the police. It means that any grouping of citizens can decide to unleash violence and mayhem on any segment of the population. That is not tolerated anywhere. And in those circumstances, when those issues manifest themselves, it is the duty of the state to enforce the law and to do so swiftly and condignly. And it is the duty of the criminal justice system to ensure that justice is administered in accordance with law. And that's all that this government is seeking to do. When the Henry boys suffered that horrendous death, persons begun of a political nature, persons associated with politics, begun to encourage people to block the roads, blaming PPP supporters for the atrocities committed against the Henry boys. And as it turned out, it had nothing to do with politics. But they were fanning that dangerous flame against an entire village, claiming that villagers from that village, Cotton Tree, West Coast, Berbice, were responsible for the Henry boys' brutal murder. And as it turned out, nothing was further from the truth. Investigations done by the police led to the arrests of several persons, none of them from that particular village. They came from other parts of the country. And if I'm not mistaken, they are on record as confessing to the murders. They have been committed to stand trial in the High Court. But political leaders went down there and incited and incensed persons, causing them to go on the road and spend days on the road at West Coast Berbice, beating and robbing innocent people, burning their properties, molesting women. That behavior, that kind of behavior will not be tolerated. It will not be tolerated. And politicians, responsible politicians, must be called out, must be condemned when they attempt to convert these issues into political and ethnic ones and manufacture scandals. In this very matter, the Golden Grove, Quindon, Bacchus matter, Mr. Aubrey Norton, no other than the opposition leader, is on public record. I have a statement here, reported in the Demerara Waves on the 19th of July 2022. He said this, and I quote, the article says this: he contended, referring to Norton, he contended that the People's Progressive Party was losing its supporters and was now resorting to fomenting ethnic strife. And he's quoted, quote, as the government becomes unpopular, as their own people are turning against them, what the government is seeking to do is to promote ethnic hostilities so that it will help them to mobilize their support base. We must not fall into that trap, unquote, said Norton, who is also leader of the People's National Congress. So when the incident occurred at Monrepo in July of last year, Norton said that it was the government supporters and that the government was mobilizing people to commit these violent acts and these acts of terrorism. When the charges are instituted now, Mr. Norton is now on record as saying that we will support them, we will do everything to deal with it. This is the very Norton who last year, when the mayhem and the violence was unfolding, said that it's PPP supporters who are doing that, inspired and orchestrated by the PPP to foment racial strife. That is what he was saying in July of last year. Now that the charges have come, he says now he will stand with those very people and he will support them. They are no longer PPP persons. When they were committing the violence, when they were robbing and beating, when they were burning innocent people's vehicles, they were PPP supporters unleashed by the PPP to create ethnic strife, because according to Norton, the PPP was losing support. So the PPP unleashed this scheme of violence on the vendors at Monrepos and on the users of the public road at Monrepos. And now when those very PPP people are being charged, Norton now supports them and says that he will stand by their side. How can you take politicians like this seriously? Tell me, how can you take politicians like this seriously? How can the international community have any respect for a politician of this caliber? How can one view this leader with any credibility whatsoever? And that is the quality and caliber of leader who holds the position of the opposition leader of the country. And PNC supporters are not seeing that this leader is completely duplicitous, completely lacks credibility, and is an utter misfit for the post which he holds. I have to tell you that. So, more charges are likely to come based upon what the Commissioner of Police has stated publicly. And the law-abiding component of this country are anxiously awaiting the institution of these charges. So I thought I will deal with that. The other important issue I want to address is the elections petition number 88. Recall there were two elections petition. One was dismissed by the CCJ, the appeal, and that one is disposed of. There's a second one that was filed, and this one challenges the Order 60. That is the order under which the recount was done. This is an order, mind you, that was crafted by GCOM, consensually. GCOM comprising of 3 opposition commissioners and 3 government commissioners and a chairperson. They sat, they crafted a recount order. They conducted the recount. They invited CARICOM to witness the recount, a team from CARICOM. And when they lost the recount, mayhem break loose again. When they realized they lost the election, the same thing. They filed petitions. One has already been disposed of. The second one is now at the Court of Appeal. Arguments were heard on February the 8th, and the arguments will continue on March the 22nd. Sometime after that, hopefully, we will get a determination or a ruling, if you wish, from the Court of Appeal in that matter. In my view, the appeal filed by APNU AFC has absolutely no merit. I don't want to predict how the court will rule, but I am free to express that view. In my view, the appeal is hopeless and ought to be dismissed. That is the view of yours truly. So I thought I'll bring you up to speed on that matter, but let me see if there are any other issues that you want me to discuss. I take a pause from my agenda and go through your views quickly because, as I said, I would like this program to be as interactive as possible. So if there is anything that you want me to deal with, I will address. Persons again are raising concerns that these charges are being filed and they are not being determined in the courts. Of course, the persons can be referring to these sets of charges because these have just been filed. But no doubt, they are referring to the charges that arose out of the elections and charges that have a political, according to some people, may have a political content to them. Well, and that's a bad description. Let me recall that. Charges that were filed against persons who were operating under the previous government and committed illegalities. Members of the public continue to ask for an update on those charges. Members of the public must understand that charges are instituted by the police upon the advice of the DPP and a police legal advisor, and they are prosecuted by those 2 agencies. Government is insulated from that process. So you must understand how a democracy works. But it doesn't mean that the government will sit idly by and allow these charges to just fall away. We are equally, as an important stakeholder in this society, as you are members of the public, we are equally interested in the outcome of these charges. So, government will request from the DPP soon an update, a status update on these charges, where they are and why they have not been um, prosecuted and progressed with the alacrity and seriousness with which they should. When that report is received, it will be made public so that you, members of the public, can understand why the charges are not being presented and prosecuted with the speed and dispatch that you feel they should be prosecuted with. You are entitled to that information. And it will come from the DPP, because the DPP is responsible for the prosecution of these offenses. And when we receive that information, we will make it public. Let me see if I can. I see persons are asking me to speak about local government elections. Well, as you know, the Minister of Local Government, as he is empowered to do, has appointed a date for local government elections. The Minister did so after receiving information from GCOM that they are ready to conduct those elections. After receiving that information, the Minister, by order published in the official gazette, has appointed a day for local government elections in June. So we are now going to local government elections in June. You will continue to see unfolding this strategy by the opposition commissioners at GCOM as they continue their efforts to stymie and frustrate the holding of those elections. The elections are due constitutionally, and it is the responsibility, in fact the duty of the government to ensure that those elections are held, and it is the duty and constitutional mandate of GCOM to conduct those elections in accordance with the law and within the time frame set by the law. When we don't have elections, the government is being blamed. Recall, they have a long story to tell you how many local government elections were not held under the PPP. Now we are forging ahead to hold elections in accordance with the law, and at every step of the way, the APNU, AFC commissioners at GCOM are throwing obstacles in the path of GCOM in their attempts to frustrate and prevent the holding of local government elections. You will read more in the press as they continue their strategy. But government is committed towards its obligation to hold those elections in the time frame appointed by the Honorable Minister of Local Government. So the country will now soon move into elections mode for the purpose of local government elections. The Presidential Commission of Inquiry, as you may be aware, has concluded its hearings. I testified before the commission on February the 9th, and many of you may have seen the extent of my testimony. I concentrated. I was following the evidence all along, and I deliberately did not wish to inundate the commission with evidence that is already before the commission, because I was following every day's hearing. So, from my vantage point, I tried to address issues that I felt, were not covered and which were obviously relevant to the terms of reference of the commission. In particular, I spent a lot of time detailing the attempts that were made in the legal forays to compromise the election's results, the attempts that were made to stop the recount from taking place, the attempts that were made by Keith Lowenfield in particular to declare or to submit to GCOM perverted results rather than the results of the recount, and detailing all illegal cases and litigation that arose out of those events. So we now await for the commissioners rather, to present their report. The terms of reference, I believe, stipulate a time within which that report is to be presented to His Excellency the President, and hopefully the commissioners will present that report within the time contemplated. It has been in the public domain reported that the residents of Caneview, Mocha, have instructed their lawyers to move to court after government shuts door on mediation. I see that, I believe, in today's newspaper. I'm not sure what is there to mediate about. The facts of this matter are notoriously well known. These are persons who were squatting on government's land. Squatters have no rights in law. They were engaged since 2008. Not now, since 2008. They were engaged by the government. They were served with notices. They were requested to remove. They didn't. I repeat, these are squatters. These are trespassers on government property, state property. Since 2008, government signaled its intention to build a roadway for public use, not for any private use, but for public use, for the public good, for the advancement of the welfare of the people of this country. These persons decide to build shacks in the very place where the road has to run. And they were served with notices. In 2008, that's nearly 15 years ago, they refused to remove. They were re-engaged in 2021. They were offered land with title. They refused. They were offered house and land with title. They refused. They were offered compensation to move them. They were offered compensation for any property damaged. They refused. They were offered land to do farming if they wish to continue farming. They refused. The people offered to move them. They refused. The people offered to buy, the government offered to buy their animals. What else can a government do in those circumstances? Should the public roadway be put on hold while 6 persons decide that they will continue to squat on government's land and block an entire highway? Which government will tolerate that type of conduct? Which government in which part of the world? Tell me. There are images of what the PNC did in 2017 and 2018 in Sapphire, where they bulldoze people's houses who are on roadways. Just 2017, 2018. And now they are shedding crocodile tears. The PNC itself, when they were in government, when the people began to squat at Sapphire, the older persons will know. President Desmond Hoyt ordered the entire Sapphire to be flooded. Dogs, police dogs were unleashed on the people at Sapphire. The place was flooded in 1990 and 1991 when they were in the government. When the PPP went into government, we regularized Sapphire and make it what it is. The PPP government did that. But 4 or 5 families, there were 28 persons at Mocha. About 20 or more of them moved. They accepted the compensation. They did the right thing. These wanted to remain. I don't know on whose advice. And the government used powers that are within the repertoire of the state to clear the land and to proceed with national development. Every state has that power. This is not compulsory acquisition. This is not eminent domain. Eminent domain takes place when you're dealing with privately owned land. Here, this is a government land. And government must have a power to remove squatters from its lands, just like private owners have a power to remove trespassers from their lands. The government has the same power, greater capacity, greater resources, and a greater obligation in the public's interest. When you refuse all the entreaties extended to you by the government, and the government was forced to do what it did and demolish the buildings, you now want to engage the government in mediation? To what end? To what end? What rights do you have? What entitlement do you have? What principle of law are you relying on that would justify compensation now? What the government was offering to you, the government paid $265 million in cash, in compensation, $265 million, and gave out 20-something house lots with titles and houses. You didn't take advantage of that. That was being given gratuitously. That is not what you are entitled to because you are a trespasser. Trespasser trespassing is not conduct for which one is rewarded. Trespassing is conduct for which one is reprimanded and sanctioned. Trespassing is a criminal offense. It is a civil wrong. So you don't get reward for an illegal act. So I don't know on what basis the government can justify giving these people taxpayers' money. The government owes a fiduciary duty to the taxpayers of this country to ensure that their monies are spent prudently and in the best interest of the country and for the public good, rewarding these recalcitrant trespassers who refused all offers when the offers were made. On what principle and basis should they now be rewarded for their recalcitrance and for their conduct? On what basis? They attempted to unleash violence on the contractors. They set a very expensive piece of capital machinery on fire. They have not been charged with those offenses yet. The law has not been applied to them as yet. This is a government. This is not a cake shop operation. Government owes a duty to taxpayers to spend money prudently, not to dole out money. As Attorney General, on what basis am I justifying paying these people compensation? The matter will have to go to the court, and the court will have to decide. There is no other principle to which one can refer to justify this request at this late stage. And again, persons must understand that certain types of conduct have consequences that must be attached to them if we want to remain a civilized modern country. And that is why persons have to understand that they must be able to decipher when others pretending to be their leaders and pretending to be championing their interests, they must be able to decipher the type of guidance and leadership that they are receiving from those persons. They were political leaders who were standing there, encouraging these people not to accept the government's offer. There were persons there who were encouraging them, leaders, parliamentarians, the opposition leader himself, were encouraging them to ignore the government, to resist the government, to unleash violence and mayhem. Well, where are those people now? Where are those people who are telling you not to accept the compensation? Go to them now for the compensation. Who are you coming to the government for? Where are the people who are standing by you and telling you to ignore the government, light the excavator on fire, resist the government, and stand your ground. Those are the persons that the lawyers got to now write and ask for compensation, not the government. I hope that persons are listening and they can see right from wrong. I am taking my time to break down these issues as clearly as I possibly can, so that in the future, when leaders tell you to jump, you must not ask how high, you must ask why. Is it the best decision? Is it the right thing to do? Because now when you are in the problem, where are they? Norton told the people in Monrepo, told the country, that those people are PPP supporters. Those are PPP supporters creating mayhem last year at Monrepo Market and robbing people and burning the roads. Now they are being charged. He's standing with them. Wait, why is he concerned if PPP charging its own people? How suddenly he is so concerned about PPP persons? PPP charging their own people according to him. What is the problem? Why is he concerned about that? These guys do not understand that we live in an age of technology where we can press a computer key and get what you said last year or 10 years ago. That is the age that we are living in. And if you can't survive in that age, then you can't operate in public office and public sphere. We have all the images where leaders of the opposition, APNU, AFC, were encouraging the people at Mocha not to accept the government's offer, not to take lands from the government, not to take the houses, not to take the compensation. Unleash violence on the contractor, light the excavator on fire. Well, those are the persons that now got to pay the compensation. Those are the persons. Last week, I had a very pleasant engagement with the Regional Security Systems Asset Recovery Unit, the RSSARU. They visited Guyana, as I reported before. I think the president may have reported that first. We signed on, I think the president signed on in Barbados, and Guyana became a member of this regional body, and we are now in a very important body within this unit. And we are partnering with this agency as part of our continuing efforts to combat organized crime, drug trafficking, money laundering, and other types of criminal conduct. This is a regional body, and they also offer advisory services, in particular in relation to AML CFT matters. As you know, Guyana will be undergoing assessment later this year, and any input that we receive from bodies that are part and parcel of the national and regional architecture, we will accept And this is a body that has done a lot of work on Guyana. And in my meeting with them, I thanked them and I accepted their offer to assist. They have done, they have drafted a model, AML-CFT Act, and many countries in the Caribbean have begun to adopt the act. They have looked at our legislation and they have done a comparative analysis with their model legislation, and they have highlighted some what they term as gaps in our legislation. So we are reviewing what their findings are as gaps, and once we are satisfied that the gaps or their opinion is well founded, then we'll adopt it. Nothing wrong with getting help, because at the end of the day, we want a robust and resilient legal architecture, in particular in the area of AML CFT. We also have to pass some new amendments in keeping with ongoing obligations arising out of recommendations from the Financial Action Task Force and the Caribbean Financial Action Task Force. We have to continue to bring more agencies operating in the commercial sector within the AML-CFT structure. And that's why we are working on legislation that will bring regulation to these various commercial endeavors. For example, we are working on a modern real estate bill. I've spoken about it already. And that bill will create a regulatory framework that will bring under this regulatory framework all those persons and entities operating in the real estate sector. Theoretically, the real estate sector has been identified as one of the high risks center or sector in relation to money laundering and the washing of proceeds of crime, because of the persons can use illicit proceeds of crime and purchase properties. So naturally, the real estate sector has been flagged as one of the areas that require a strong regulatory framework, and we don't have that in Guyana. So we are working on that, as we are doing in various other endeavors. The Privy Council recently handed down a very important judgment emanating from Jamaica, where the Jamaican Bar Association sued the Attorney General because the Attorney General sought to bring the legal profession under the framework of the AML-CFT structure of Jamaica. Same thing we are trying to do here. The legal profession has been identified as one of the areas which can create a high risk, can be considered high risk for proceeds of crime, etc. The lawyers' arguments have been for a long time that they have a canon of confidentiality which is derived from their ethical and professional obligations and duties to their clients. You see, the AML-CFT protocols require you to make certain disclosures when you are confronted, for example, with a a suspicious transaction. A suspicious transaction is defined in the AML-CFT law. Now, if one is to do that as a lawyer, then it is quite understandable how disquiet can arise in respect of whether one's duty of confidentiality to one's client is not conflicted with one obligation to disclose under the MLCFT. And that has been a very difficult issue existing in all the countries in the Caribbean. Fortunately, we now have a judicial pronouncement on the matter at the highest level, the level of the Privy Council. And the Privy Council essentially ruled that the legal profession must subject itself to the AML-CFT law, and that there may be conflict, but public interest and the rule of law will mandate that the obligations under the AML-CFT be satisfied over and above one's duty or duties to a client under a lawyer-client privilege. More so, the lawyer-client privilege really doesn't protect illegal transactions and illegalities. It protects lawfulness and lawful transactions. And it's a very complex judgment which it's important to read. I have to read it a little more to understand it fully. But I am happy that it has provided, not only for Guyana, but the region, important guidance on this issue of the legal profession vis-a-vis the obligations under or duties under the AML-CFT legislation. It's a common problem throughout the region. And the legal profession, attorneys general, who are part of the legal profession, governments, the judiciary have all been grappling with this very, very complex and delicate issue. Fortunately, we now have some judicial guidance on the matter, and I know that it will clarify a lot of the issues that were opaque and were contentious, and the matter is now clearer in the minds of most of us. So we have come to the end of this evening's program. This week, Thursday, we will be celebrating our 53rd Republic anniversary. The attainment of republicanism is one of the most significant constitutional milestone in the calendar of any nation. It is the celebration of our complete disconnect with colonialism, and it is the conferment of exclusive self-determination as a nation and the ability to completely chart one's own destiny and future as a sovereign nation. It's one of the fundamental tenets of sovereignty, and we will be celebrating that important constitutional and national milestone this Thursday. It's a public holiday, and it is also the time when we celebrate Mashramani. So I want to take this opportunity to extend to all Guyanese Mashramani greetings and greetings on our 53rd Republican anniversary. I will be in Essequibo. You know, we normally raise the flag, the national flag, at events in every region across the country. I will be in Region 2 for the flag raising exercise. So all of those who are watching this program on the Essequibo coast, please attend the flag raising ceremony where I am supposed to be the guest, the main speaker, and I hope to see you there and to interact with you. Once again, happy Mashramani greetings, happy Republic Day greetings, and I will join you next week as we continue the important discourse on issues in the news. Please enjoy the rest of the evening and have a great week until we meet again next week. Thank you very much and good evening.